Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about U.S. imperialism. And imperialism means that you're trying to gain influence in another country. So when we look at this map right here, this is the United States, and this says American possession. There's all these areas that are actually American possession. And this map is from the early 1900s. And it shows that the United States, we start expanding. We get Hawaii in 1867. We get Puerto Rico in 1898. We get the Guantanamo U.S. Naval Base in Cuba. We have the Philippines, Virgin Islands, Hawaiian Islands, American Samoa. So as you can see, the United States, we're expanding. But how are we getting these countries or these territories? We're starting to have a lot of influence. Remember, the United States, before the Civil War, it was an agricultural economy, which means, it was doing pretty well. We had some money. But after the Civil War, we become an industrial economy, and the United States starts making a ton of money. And with all that money, we also have a lot of influence. Europe used to not really listen to us, but now that we have money and we have a lot of business and a lot of technology, we start to have a lot of power in the world. So this is really the U.S. starts becoming a big power. The first place we're going to talk about is Hawaii. Hawaii is today it's a state in the United States, but it used to actually be its own country. And we're going to talk about annexation, and that's the process of taking over and politically controlling another land. And in 1893, the Hawaiian monarch, which was led by Queen, I'm going to say her name wrong, but it's Queen Likalani, was overthrown with the help of American settlers. So Hawaii was not part of the United States. It was its own country, but we had lots of Americans there. And what happened, though, is the Americans that lived there, they didn't like the Queen, so they actually took her out of power. They overthrew the government, and in 1898, Congress proclaimed Hawaii an official U.S. territory. So that's different than a state. Hawaii was not a state yet. A territory, though, means we have a lot of control over it. Like today, we still have a lot of territories. Puerto Rico is actually a U.S. territory. And Puerto Rico, some people in Puerto Rico want it to become a state in the United States, but right now it's just a U.S. territory. And there's something called the Monroe Doctrine. We talked about this before. But President James Monroe in 1823 said the Americas, which North and South America, are close to Europe. He said if any country from Europe attacks any country in America, they are also fighting the United States. So Europe is no longer allowed in America. So if Spain wanted to go back into, let's say, Honduras and try to take over, or if they try to go into El Salvador, the United States would say, nope. Europe, England, Spain, whoever you are not allowed in the Americas. The Americas are closed. And the reason for this also is in 1823, there was already countries all over North and South America. It wasn't England anymore. It wasn't Spain anymore. All these countries like El Salvador, Bolivia, Chile, they all declared independence. So it was no longer... We didn't want any other countries from Europe interfering. Next, we're going to talk about the Spanish-American War. We're going to go to war with Spain. And there was people called expansionists, and there are people who wanted the United States to be bigger. They desired a foothold in the Caribbean and Cuba in the 1850s. So the Caribbean Sea, they wanted to have part of that. And at the time, Cuba was part of Spain, and Cuba... and people in Cuba wanted independence from Spain. And there was also large investors in Cuban sugar, and the overall treatment of Spanish against Cubans, and the Monroe Doctrine all called for American involvement in Cuba. Remember, the Monroe Doctrine says Europe is not allowed in the Americas, and Spain was in Cuba. So according to the Monroe Doctrine, that's not allowed. So the United States, we get involved in Cuba. And after the USA Maine, which is a naval boat, exploded in the Cuban harbor Havana, President McKinley asked Congress to declare war on Spain. So the USSA Maine, it was a boat, and it was in Cuba at the time, and it exploded. Nobody's 100% sure how it exploded, but it did, and it sank, and we blamed Spain, so we went to war with Spain. And the first shots were fired in the Philippines, with the final shots fired months later. So some of the results of this war is Puerto Rico was annexed by the United States, so that means Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory. The Philippines was annexed by the United States, so the Philippines are now became a United States territory. And the United States asserted its rights to intervene in Cuban affairs, so essentially we could tell Cuba what to do. And Guam was annexed after the Spanish-American War. So Guam, Cuba, Philippines, and Puerto Rico all used to be part of Spain, but after the Spanish War, they became part of the United States. But Cuba became its own country, but we were able to intervene a lot with them. We were able to tell them what to do. Next, we started something called the open door policy, and America was concerned that European powers would cut off the U.S.'s ability to trade successfully in China. China was a very important country for trading, has a huge population in China, and China is closer to Europe than it is the United States. So we were afraid that Europe would go in China and say that don't trade with America, don't buy their stuff. But we created this open door policy, so Europe wasn't allowed to tell China what to do, and China was allowed to trade with the United States. And the open door policy urged all foreigners in China to obey Chinese law and to observe fair competition. And essentially what this did is this made sure that America was able to continue trading with China. Next, we're going to talk about the Panama Canal, which we briefly talked about for our warm-up. And after the Spanish-American War, the U.S. empire stretched from Puerto Rico to the Philippines. So the United States was very, very big, went all the way from the Philippines to Puerto Rico. I mean, Philippines, that's in Asia. And then Puerto Rico is in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're very, very big. And the U.S. needed a canal through Central America to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It was very difficult if you wanted to trade, because you have to use boats for trading. If you lived in Florida, you wanted to get to California, it took a long time because you got to go all the way down around South America. But the United States, they built a canal through Panama. They made it easier. And the U.S. encouraged Panama's independence from Colombia. And the parties then negotiated a treaty, which is an agreement to build the canal. And the reason why we bring up Panama and Colombia, because in 1900, so I mean barely over 100 years ago, there was no Panama. All of this was Colombia. Colombia went all the way up and bordered Costa Rica. And like I said, in 1900, Panama did not exist. But a lot of people that lived in this area did not want to be part of Colombia. So the United States supported them. We gave them a lot of weapons, and we helped them so they can get independence from Colombia. And because we helped Panama get independence from Colombia and no longer be part of Colombia, they let us build the canal right here. So now, if you're in a boat, you can go through Panama, through the Panama Canal. And next we're going to talk about President Theodore Roosevelt. And he expanded the United States police presence in the Western Hemisphere that was established in the Monroe Doctrine. So remember, Monroe Doctrine says Europe's not allowed inside the Americas. And we kind of became a police for North and South America. And that means if any countries were having trouble with Europe, they let us know and the U.S. got involved. Some people think, though, the U.S. maybe did too much and wasn't fair to some of these countries in South America and Central America. And the Roosevelt corollary allowed the U.S. to resume the role of police in Latin America to restore order and to keep European powers out. So, already talked about the European powers out. So if, say, England tried to go to Honduras and get involved there, we didn't allow that. We would kick England out. But also if a country was having problems, or let's say maybe we'll talk about it more, but in El Salvador, there and Honduras, they had several times where people in the country went on strike. They didn't like, there was a place called Dole that sold bananas that wasn't paying their employees very much, and the U.S. got involved. And that's part of the Monroe Doctrine and also kind of becoming police in Latin America. When things kind of got out of hand, the United States would get involved. Once again, some people think that was good for the United States to do. Some people think it was bad, that the United States should kind of leave these countries alone and only focus on what the U.S. should do. And the last one is called dollar diplomacy. And this was a policy by President William Taft to increase American investments in business and banks throughout Central America and the Caribbean. So William Taft wanted to get United States money, and he wanted to give this money to a lot of companies and to a lot of banks in Central America and the Caribbean. So if, let's say, Cuba was going to make some new businesses, the United States would give a lot of money to these businesses or even start businesses. If the Dole company, which does fruit, went to Honduras, the United States helped Dole with a lot of money. And if there was banks in Central America, the United States gave those banks lots of money. And essentially, William Taft believed other countries would listen to us if we gave them a lot of money. So if we wanted to tell Mexico maybe to change a law or to let some company trade, or if we need better trade agreements, they kind of listened to us because we gave them so much money. And that's it for imperialism. This is the time when I said the United States is really expanding. We're getting lots of new territories, and we're really a world power now. We're no longer just some small country that farms. We're a big industrial power, and we're expanding. We're getting lots of territories, and we're telling people what to do. If you guys have any questions, let me know.